Hi, it's Kian. Alright, today I'm going to pick up where I left off on youth employment. A few days ago, I broke down Manpower Minister Leng's remarks on the latest graduate employment figures. So those comments came during a press conference by the Singapore Economic Resilience Task Force, basically the group that's trying to keep Singapore's economy steady amidst US tariffs and all the other global uncertainties. So if you haven't caught that video yet, go check it out. So the link's in the description and also at the top right hand corner of your screen. But even if you missed it, here's the one number you need to know. That as of June 2025, only 51.9% of our latest graduates in Singapore are employed. And today we're going to unpack what NTUC Secretary General Chee Meng had to say about that. And before we jump into his comments, let's talk a little bit about Mr. Ng. Now, this man went through hell and back during and after GE 2025. The campaign was rough. He was up against a first-time WP candidate, and if he had lost for the second election in a row, it probably would have been the end of his political career. And that alone would stress anyone out. And then came the aftermath. He had to deal with unproven allegations from the Su Haiting dinner, and there was some defamation mess involving a Mr. Rich Seng, and even had to apologize publicly for a comment he made back in 2017 during a Ministry of Education dialogue. And I still remember that day clearly, the 6th of May, because for what I believe is the first time in Singapore's political history, a former minister voluntarily told the Prime Minister not to give him any government position. Instead, he pledged to focus entirely on being an advocate for Jalan Kayu residents and for workers in Singapore. So it's been 2 months since. Now, say what you want about Chee Meng, but you cannot deny that in the present he's walking the talk. Some might think it's all for show, but look, it's not easy to keep up a show week after week. Turning out at MPS, walkabouts, attending events, that takes real time and effort. I'm not an MP, but even as a volunteer on Wednesdays and Sundays, I can tell you that there are days where I'm just dragging myself out of the house. So props to him for showing up and following through on his promise to serve. But anyways, let's take a look at what he's doing in his role as Labour Chief.
One group that we are paying closer attention to is our young job seekers entering the labour market, especially during this time of global uncertainty. They are anxious, and I understand their anxiety. We observe that they face 4 gaps in their transition into the workforce: skills gap, expectation gap, job opportunity gap, and an experience gap.
So first off, I really appreciate how quickly he followed up his opening line, "I understand the issue," with 4 specific gaps that the NTUC had identified. Because that is how you build trust. Anyone can say, "I understand." But when you actually explain what you understand, it shows that you're not just, paying lip service. So let's go through the 4 gaps.
Firstly, a skills gap. Some youths feel unprepared to enter fast-evolving fields, such as ESG. They have asked for more targeted upskilling, both industry-relevant technical skills and also soft skills.
Starting with the skills gap. I think Chee Meng is spot on here. I was recently helping a commodities trading house look for market risk interns, and there's a key concept in market risk called value at risk, or VAR. So I won't bore you with the technical stuff, but in short, it's a way of estimating how much money traders might lose on a bad day based on probability. Mathematically, it's not hard, but interpreting the number, that's the real challenge. Now, here's what surprised me. I interviewed quite a number of fresh graduates. Some of them had master's degrees in quantitative fields, and these folks had perfect or near perfect GPAs and 3 to 4 internships under their belt. Honestly, right, it made me feel quite lucky that I graduated much earlier, because I'm not even sure I'll be employable if I were competing with this bunch. Anyways, despite all the academic firepower, none of them could explain what VAR actually meant in a way that kind of makes sense. There was no intuition behind the numbers. They could calculate it, but they couldn't really connect it to the business context. And don't get me started on the soft skills. So I also asked all of them to explain VAR as though they were speaking to a young child, because that's what you often have to do in real life when talking to traders who don't live and breathe risk models. So most of them just defaulted to using jargons and tried to sound like they were pitching to a PhD on Tinder or something. It was not great, put it that way. So yes, there's clearly a skills gap, and it's not just about the hard skills. It's also the ability to translate knowledge into application and doing it with the right communication. So here's where I have to be a bit critical because this skills gap issue isn't new at all. I mean, Minister Ong Yi Kang talked about it when he was education minister. Chee Meng himself talked about it when he was education minister, and those were like 7 years ago. So how is it that we're still stuck here? Yes, I get that jobs have evolved. AI is now in many workflows, ESG roles have popped up, but many jobs, and especially their soft skill requirements, haven't changed all that much. So why are we still saying graduates lack the soft skills needed for their very first jobs? So that brings me to another important point, lifelong learning. Now, I'm a big believer in lifelong learning, but I wonder whether we're overusing it as a convenient catch all solution. Like, not everything should be learned on the job or picked up 10 years down the road. So, back to my market race example. Let's say there are 10 core skills you need to be great in that role. Sure, you can pick them up across a 30, 40-year career, but shouldn't tertiary education at least cover, say, three or four of the key ones needed to land that very first job? Because if a graduate is leaving school and still not ready for their first job, it really begs the question, what was the point of spending 4 years in university?
Second, an expectation gap. We have also heard that our views have different expectations in terms of play, work-life balance, or job fit.
Alright, let's talk about expectation gap. I showed this graph in my earlier video with Minister Tan See Leng's comments. Basically, graduate employment rates are falling while median salaries are going up. So what that suggests to me is that graduates are becoming more selective. So unless a job ticks all their boxes, they're just willing to wait it out. Honestly, I'm a bit lost for words. And I have a bit of a hot take on this, that I don't have a lot of sympathy for this group. Because to me, right, this is like public housing. If you're a good citizen, work hard, take care of your family, and still cannot get a home, that's a very serious problem. And the government needs to step in. But if you're just upset that you can't get a 5-room BTO in your dream location, then I'm sorry, man. That's a want, not a need. So same with employment. If jobs are available but you're rejecting them because they're not your dream job or the starting pay isn't high enough, I'm sorry, I got no sympathy at all. In fact, I wish there was a way to exclude these cases from employment stats so we can zoom in on those that truly and actually need help. That said, I also get that it's important to allow space for aspiration because if we crush ambition too early, we risk raising a generation of soulless workers, just going through the motions. So it's a tough balance.
Third, opportunity gap. Many graduates are concerned about the impact of global instability and the AI impact on job availabilities and job natures.
Next, the opportunity gap. This one's huge, and it's where people expect the government to step in. So Chee Meng talked about it, how AI and other disruptions are shrinking the number of available jobs. So let's say out of every 100 jobs that used to exist, only 80 now remains. So that's a 20% drop in job demand. But the number of graduates hasn't gone down, so what happens to that 20% who now have nowhere to go? That's the elephant in the room, and that's where things get a bit shaky.
Some are extending internships, and there's a growing perception that hiring for entry-level roles has slowed.
So I don't know if you caught that, but Mr. Ng said there's a growing perception that entry-level hiring has slowed, not necessarily a fact. But to be honest, even as someone not in recruitment, I can see hiring slowing down. And I hear this all the time from students that I meet at university events. So is it just a perception, or is there real data to show otherwise? I think it would have been good to clarify that. Then there's this potential time bomb. Mr. Ng mentioned students are coping by extending internships, and I also see cases where people are delaying graduation. And that might be a smart short-term fix. But what happens next year when the next batch of graduates come in? Now there's going to be 1.5x or double the usual cohort that are chasing the same number of jobs. So this is just kicking the can down the road.
Fourth, an experience gap. Even when jobs are available, many employers still prefer candidates with prior industry experience. This puts first-time job seekers at a disadvantage, somewhat of a dilemma, creating a tough cycle, as they need a job to gain experience, but need experience to get their first job. You can see how these 4 gaps come in a cycle to somewhat cause anxiety for many of these students coming out into the workforce.
So last one, the experience gap. So this is common sense, right? I mean, employers prefer candidates with experience. In today's world where geopolitical uncertainties can trigger 10% tariffs overnight, I completely understand why companies are risk averse. I mean, they are focused on survival and not training newbies. I think that's where I think the government should step in with one-off support measures. Maybe give salary subsidies to companies hiring fresh grads or offer tax breaks. So these don't need to be permanent changes, just targeted help, right, for a difficult season this year.
And I think these are valid concerns, and it's a sign that our young workers care deeply about meaningful, sustainable careers. But as Minister Tan has highlighted, the labour markets remains resilient today.
Honestly, I don't see how we can call our labour market resilient when we're not even sure if there are enough good jobs for young workers. It's not just about having some job, it's about having the opportunity to start a meaningful career. So Mr. Ng wrapped up his point by asking youths to keep an open mind and shared some of NTUC's initiatives for youth workers. And you can catch that in the video link in the description if you want to watch the full thing. And to his credit, I think Chee Meng did a good job in identifying the key issues. Now I hope that NTUC can work closely with public and private stakeholders to actually solve them. Because 51.9% graduate employment is not good. Yes, it's a 4% improvement from last year, but we're now seeing years of weak employment outcomes. We can't just wait around for long-term reforms. We need short-term solutions that prevent an entire generation from being left behind. So I'm curious to know what you think. Are the 4 gaps Mr. Ng mentioned accurate, and how would you tackle them? So drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed the content around Singapore's social issues and politics, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. So like this video too, because it really helps the YouTube algo gods to push our content to more Singaporeans. And until next time, this is our Red Dot Perspective.